to Strategy Execution Unlocked and the 7th episode in our OGs of Strategy Execution series. In this series, I sit down with the true pioneers who have shaped the strategy execution space, industry analysts, authors, founders of management consultancies and software companies, and of course, seasoned practitioners. Today, I'm especially excited to welcome Matt Light to the show. Matt is widely regarded as a true OG of PPM and strategy execution. As Vice President and Research Director at Gartner, he founded and built Gartner's Program and Portfolio Management Advisory Service. For many years, he led the PPM Research Group, authored the influential PPM Magic Quadrant reports, chaired an interdisciplinary PPM research community, and spearheaded Gartner's PPM Summit and conferences. After Gartner, Matt served as Vice President of Strategy and Corporate Development at Planisware, a leading provider of PPM and strategic portfolio management software solutions, where he continued to influence strategy execution, agile transformation, and the overall direction of the market. Matt, thanks for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Ben, and hello to everybody out there in podcast land.
So, we've talked about this before, but strategy execution can mean different things to different people. Let's start with maybe what it means to you.
All right. Strategy execution. I see it as part of a broader set of practices that loosely fall under the heading of, I like to think of it as quality management, generally referred to as lean management or even agile. There are a number of these lean management practices. One of them, called Hoshin Kanri, coming out of Japan, was previously translated very badly as quality function deployment, meaning deploying the right function, that being strategy and capability. And I think that strategy execution is more descriptive in English than that rather tortured QFD definition. As I say, Hoshin Kanri, or strategy execution, is part of this broader set of practices around quality management, or these days sometimes referred to as enterprise agile. I described some of this in a recent paper published on Planisware.com. Ben mentioned that I'd been working for Planisware, and that one's called Enterprise Agile Transformation and Sustainment. So let's call it Enterprise Agile instead of Lean, because when people say lean, well, it reminds me of that old Larson cartoon where the dog owner is scolding the dog, saying, "Ginger, get down off the couch. Ginger, Ginger. No, that's bad. Get down." And all the dog hears is blah, 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 Ginger, blah, 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 Ginger. Well, when you say lean, a lot of people, all they hear is blah, 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 efficiency, blah, 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 cut headcount, blah, 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 cut. So let's call it enterprise agile instead of lean these days.
Absolutely. So, you've been reporting on the space or watching the space for many years now. Maybe it'd be good to maybe talk a little bit about your career overall and how you've seen the space evolve, and maybe how that's going to build if history repeats. What are the 2026 and beyond key trends?
Well, let's see. A little bit about my career, a little bit about trends there, I guess. I mentioned Planisware. That's where I landed last at my career. And I think Planisware probably reflects some of the more recent trends in the software industry. There's been a bit of a bifurcation between, let's call it, strategic portfolio management and collaborative work management. And Planisware actually offers two solutions. Planisware Enterprise, which is more the SPM tool. It has a lot of strategy management features along with the more traditional project and portfolio management and cost and risk management types of features. But they also have their Orchestra product. It's single code based now, but the Orchestra product is, I won't call it a collaborative work management tool because it's a little bit more capable than that. Call it a collaborative PPM product because it will manage at the portfolio level, the resource management level. A lot of these CWM tools kind of lower end team oriented tools. But that bifurcation has been taking place in the market. So I think that's one trend and that Planisware reflects. I think there are some other important trends to look at. Of course, you can't talk about the future without talking about AI, artificial intelligence. It's coming for us. Uh, but at least for now, I'm not afraid because it depends upon the data, and people aren't feeding it the data. That's part of the problem with AI in SPM is if you want to use your SPM tool to help with your decision support. And AI should be very good to support what if analysis, simulations. It should be very good at helping with prioritization or at such complex tasks as scheduling, resource allocation, estimation. But it needs data to work with. It can't estimate future projects without a ton of data about past projects, preferably in context. And this has been a notorious bugaboo for years, Ben. As you know, at the end of projects, very seldom do you have a really rigorous set of data collection about that project. Usually, maybe there's a lessons learned meeting, and actually it can use some of the text and learn from language some things about project risk, but without hard data about costs and overruns and resource capacity and that sort of thing, uh, I don't think it's coming for our jobs as portfolio or program managers anytime soon. So those I think are a couple of trends: the bifurcation in the software market. Of course, there's also the evolution of the PMO, and this I guess relates back to my career. When I started covering the project office, as it was called then, it was literally a project office, an office about a project. It was sort of like the project office that you see at a construction site. That trailer over there, the trailer's where the project manager lives, and he has all the documents and everybody's phone number and all that sort of thing. So the project office in an enterprise or an IT setting would be about the execution of a significant project that required actually a higher level of management than most of the routine work. It evolved over time to be a center for management practices for projects in general, as well as tracking not just one project, but multiple projects. I think the most interesting recent development has been its evolution as a staff function for senior management, where it collects project proposals and assists with the evaluation of those proposals against the strategy, and it can make recommendations and alternate recommendations to the C-suite or to senior decision makers as to which projects should be prioritized immediately or prioritized for the future or not really fitting with the strategy at all. So the PMO, has perhaps evolved to be an EPMO and then to a strategic management office or a strategic portfolio office in more recent. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't still see the occasional just purely project office or the PPM oriented EPMO. They continue to coexist at different levels, but there has been an evolution as well where the value of a strategic portfolio management office, I think, is increasingly being recognized by senior management. It's a staff function. Senior management doesn't have the time to do all the cost and benefit and risk analysis and simulations and stuff that a good SPMO can do. And then that SPMO can also be involved in monitoring management practices, sometimes even then also allocating project managers, either directly out of the SPMO or out of a companion office that provides project managers or program managers.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of chatter in the space at the moment about a PMO and the role of the PMO at the enterprise level, and it needing to take more of a value centric outlook versus the traditional kind of tactical approach they've taken in managing projects. What do you think are the sort of key differences between that strategic level? I call it a strategy execution office to get away from sort of tactical connotations of a PMO, kind of a rebranding exercise. What do you think the difference is at that level, that kind of enterprise level function versus the traditional PMOs, that maybe carry that tactical connotation?
Well, yeah, I think the traditional PMOs were very much involved in monitoring the projects in the portfolio. Maybe you've got dozens or hundreds of projects in the course of the year, and management is interested in, their progress. Have they started yet? Are they partly done? How are they against budget and schedule? Do they still fit? Are risks being mitigated? Have risks waylaid them? These kinds of things. And that kind of a PMO would make recommendations. If a project did run into trouble, it was kill it or fix it would be a recommendation coming out of the PMO with backup as to why you should kill it before it breeds. uh, so, the function was still mainly focused on the project and the program level, how to remediate problems and add resources. You'd have good resource availability or visibility into availability and that sort of thing. When it began to collect project proposals, I think that was the first step in the evolution into a strategy execution office, because then senior management was beginning to rely on the PMO to not just monitor and control projects and fix them if they get in trouble, etc., but to match those proposals against strategy. I think initially there wasn't as much strategy matching as much as just look at the business case, make sure that it's a reasonable business case, in that all the fields were filled out and made some kind of sense in terms of what kind of cost, benefit, risk the proposal faced. But at some point, alignment, the big A alignment word, came into play. And that was, I think, when the PMO began to be seen in more capable organizations as having a role in supporting strategy execution. And then I think it evolved from there. I do think there is a little bit of a slippery slope that some strategy execution offices face, which is not to get too big for their britches, right? They're not setting strategy. They're a staff function. They are not senior management, and they shouldn't attempt to be. That's one of the quickest ways to get disestablished or disenfranchised as a PMO, is to start to tell the C-levels or other executives, what you think should be the strategy, what you think is wrong with their thinking about the strategy. That's a pretty dangerous way to go. But I do think that the strategy execution office now is more than just monitoring the execution, and it does monitor that alignment and suggest different alternatives of which projects align best with the portfolio. And that will depend upon the profiles of the project, budget levels for the different aspects of the portfolio, and so
on. That makes sense. And we had I think actually the last OGs of Strategy Execution episode with Stuart Easton from Transparent Choice, we talked about alignment still being one of the biggest challenges out there. So having an enterprise function that's, working with the C-suite to bridge the gap between the strategic plan and the execution, and ensure that there is, clear communication and decomposition of that strategy across the organization to improve that alignment is obviously key. And there's obviously two bookends there, right? Setting the strategy, communicating the strategy, but also then measuring the results on the back end.
And I should have mentioned that communication point in connection to your first question, Hoshin Kanri strategy execution. That original Hoshin Kanri concept was very much about communicating the strategy on down from the senior executives that are setting strategy through the layers of management and down to the rank and file. I alluded to it when I said, quality function deployment is about deploying the right strategy out to the rest of the organization. But that communication within an enterprise agile or lean context should also involve, importantly, feedback loops. So as that senior management sets strategy, hopefully they've received some input into that strategy from everything from the external customer to the internal folks that are customer facing, whether that's sales, marketing, customer service, whatever it is. So hopefully they're getting some input up the chain. And then as they deploy the strategy down to the levels of management, getting feedback from those levels of management in what has been compared to a game of catch ball. I forget the Japanese term for it, but the executives toss the ball down to the next level of management, and they give their feedback and toss it back. In the meantime, they toss the ball down to the next level of management. They review it, make some suggestions, recommendations, toss it back. But they also, in the meantime, toss it down to the next level and eventually down to those customer-facing folks that can see the value most clearly. So that whole catchball process, although it's not technically under the heading of Hoshin Kanri, is part of that strategy execution, or QFD, if you will.
No, that makes sense. So when I think about strategy execution, right, it sometimes easy just to think about the major strategic initiatives and how they align and how well they're executed and measuring the results, right? But I feel like it takes a village to master strategy execution in the organization. You've got all different functions, whether that's the traditional PMO or the enterprise PMO function doing exactly what we just talked about, or whether that's operations teams or the business architecture teams looking to ensure that the operating fabric of the organization, both from a business and enterprise architecture point of view, is optimized to be able to deliver on that strategy. Do you see the role of that strategy execution office needing to better cater to the needs of the other roles in the organization to bring things together, or is it going to stay more on the discretionary activity and spend through major initiatives?
Yeah, I think that there is a need to engage, but you can't really be involved in the day-to-day activities of all those different layers. You can't be all things to all people. But I do think there's one critical engagement that I used to talk about in all those 25 years at Gartner covering this, and that is really between the PMO, or the Strategy Execution Office, and an architectural review board. And that engagement, I think, is very important to the future state of the enterprise architecture. Without visibility into the portfolio, the architectural review board has limited influence on the architectural aspects of projects and programs that are being proposed. And I think that is a critical visibility for them to achieve their mission, and should be an important consideration to the Strategy Execution Office. That is, enterprise architecture is really not a destination. You never really get there. It is a journey. It's a journey of continuous improvement, and the Strategy Execution Office, I think, has a stake in that improvement, and to some degree is accountable for that improvement. So that, I think, is an important engagement to consider for the Strategy Execution Office. Would you focus, I think, a little more on enterprise architecture than most, or than I do. So does that ring for you?
Absolutely. I mean, to me, I've always been confused about difference between the naming convention of enterprise architecture and business architecture. Right, enterprise architecture, the technology. To me, the business architecture is probably more important and should lead enterprise architecture as much as strategic portfolio management should lead the project investments that you're then going to work on. But I think that obviously when you look at the spend that goes into the operational activity and spend that's representative of the business and enterprise architecture, right? It's critical that that is optimized, rationalized, and aligned with strategy as much as the discretionary activity and spend. And when we think about an organization in terms of its ability to execute on its strategy, yes, it's the ability to execute effectively on these major initiatives, but also improve the capabilities, value streams, business processes to make sure the whole organization is humming relative to that strategy. So from my perspective, I do see the need to kind of bridge these key roles and build a cohesive operating model, designed to optimize strategy execution across these functions, make sure everyone's pulling in the same direction. Sticking with maybe the control office, I feel like again, the PMO has often been thought of as overly bureaucratic, right? I believe when Gartner, you promoted something called the just enough process, right? What does that mean to you?
Well, yeah, we used to refer to the PMO that you don't want to be as the process police, right? Uh, and we're from the PMO. We're here to help was one of the more dreaded uh, phrases in the IT organizations that Gartner addressed a lot. And so, just enough process meant fitting the right process to the right kind of project. And this was a bit of a divergence, if you will, from the mentality of a sort of a one size fits all agile approach. Coming out of an IT organization in which agile development methodology fit a large part of the application delivery portfolio. Uh, Nevertheless, it didn't fit every project. It did fit very well with, I think, maintenance and enhancement projects and mini projects, but with major projects, often agile was not necessarily the best fit. So, just enough process meant to be lightweight, flexible, responsive to the extent that it fit the project. But you might need some more process for other projects that had higher levels of risk or other factors like regulation. If the application that you're working on had some serious health or safety implications, perhaps even life threatening in some settings, these applications could be very important to safety or to big financial losses. So in those cases, often those development projects were subject to a good bit more documentation, requirements definition, a lot more testing along the way, and documentation of the testing in a way that was anathema to a lot of development folks. So that was sort of the idea of just enough process, was to fit the process to the kind of project it was. So I'm afraid I became known as a bit of a curmudgeon on agile. Gartner was so focused on IT and application development that when I would say that in our PPM group that was less focused in that area, when I would say, well, this doesn't necessarily fit all projects and it doesn't fit these manufacturing projects, or it doesn't fit, something coming out of, I don't know, a product development group, then you'd get a little bit of backlash from the AppDev folks in Gartner because you were not pure enough in your dedication to the one true religion. That said, I do think that's one of the trends that we can talk about. I think that agile has finally settled into its appropriate place in, shall we say, the portfolio of methodologies in most IT and application development organizations. And it, I think, has learned to work with budgeting processes, scheduling, planning and scheduling processes from the other business units that frankly dwarf IT in terms of their size. In most organizations, IT is less than 10 or even 5% of the organization. So I think that that's an important thing to observe. And one thing that I look forward to in the sort of Hegelian context, Hegel, the philosopher, talked about the synthesis that came out of a thesis and an antithesis. So we had the old thesis of waterfall and structured development types of methodology, and then we had its antithesis, agile development. I think we've reached a sort of a synthesis, a sort of an equilibrium at this point. So we have now a new thesis. What's going to be the new antithesis?
No, that's interesting. So, we over bureaucratic processes, something we talk about at the strategy execution forum is the need, and goes back to that strategy execution office, the need to establish the minimal enterprise controls and embrace autonomy of governance, autonomy of execution within the sub portfolios. So I strongly believe, when I think about how I've observed the space over the last 20 plus years, those one size fits all methodologies end up fitting no one, right? And I feel like I date myself, right, when I was working for the early incarnation of the first UMT, and we built that portfolio management product to select the right investments, and we were talking to you in the 2002 2003 timeframes and say, look, we need to focus on selecting the right projects as much as delivering the projects effectively, which I like to think help influence the direction in terms of creating that space of project and program portfolio management, PPM, or whatever we want to call it. What was interesting to me, and we were super excited when you founded that or termed that new research space of PPM. What interested me at the time was it felt like as soon as that happened, the traditional PMO people took over that function of PPM, right? And I don't know where the portfolio people went, right? Because the PMO started with that kind of bottom-up, waterfall-centric approach to managing projects and the entire portfolio. For some reason, you couldn't start to do portfolio management until you had your ducks in order or in a row in terms of time reporting and things like that, right? So it felt like portfolio management got deferred, right, in the favor of a one-size-fits-all PPM, in this case, a waterfall-centric sort of PPM way of working. Right now, as again, giving my perspective in terms of how I think the market evolved, as we started going into the 2010s, right, and we started to say, okay, well, now we're seeing different web-based tools out there that support different flavors of project management. So you start to see different portfolios in the same organization, using different cloud-based, web-based technology for managing projects. So you sort of think different things. Now, around about that same time as well, started to see the advent of agile execution, right? And let's say 2015 timeframe or wherever that was. But I feel like we didn't necessarily learn from the past mistakes. So instead of embracing, agile execution and, enterprise agility in terms of the portfolio management capabilities needed, again, that enterprise agile transformation started bottom up with tooling, the underlying teams of a new way of working until we bumped right back into the same problem we had before, which was a lack of portfolio management capabilities to see the woods for the trees. So inherently, I feel like as a space, an industry, whatever you want to call it, we've always been wanting that one-size-fits-all approach versus embracing the fact of we need the minimal enterprise standards, and how you execute may be different, as you said before, on different types of projects or different functions that's best for them. But again, portfolio management got deferred, and I feel like, again, we did that reverse lobbying with Dan Stang and others that were in charge of the Magic Quadrant at that point to do exactly what you said earlier, bifurcate the two Ps, because we felt like the second P, the portfolio P, needed its time in the sun and needed to be the main focus.
Yeah, although I would add that I think the picture is made more fuzzy or blurred a bit by the varying levels of capability and maturity in different organizations. Toward the end of my time at Gartner, when I was still co-authoring the Magic Quadrant, but had largely moved on to creating and then handling a lot of inquiry from interested organizations, creating the capability maturity model for PPM in organizations. And, the vast majority, I would say probably a good 2/3, 3/4 of organizations were level one, level two. And for those folks, you're right, they're PMOs. They tended to look over here for the keys that they dropped under the street light because the light was better, although they dropped them over here. So they're looking over there for, time reporting and schedule compliance and those sorts of things. And oh, by the way, uh, I think they got a little too big for their britches when it came to managing a lot of non-project work, mini projects, maintenance and enhancement. And this, I think, is what largely sparked the agile revolt, or call it agile contempt for the PMO and for the term project management in general, because the the project management disciplines were being applied inappropriately. They didn't fit. You're bringing in a large level of analysis and governance controls onto, an enhancement piece of work that's taken 2 or 3 guys 2 or 3 weeks to do. It takes longer to get through all the process than it does to do the work. So that was a totally valid objection and revolution, I think. But on the other hand, you did have some level three organizations and beyond who were beginning to function at that portfolio level. What we mostly saw blurring the picture was all the level one, level two stuff going on, whereas 10 or 20% of the organizations, and I reviewed hundreds of these self-assessments, you'd give them a 100-question spreadsheet in like 6 different categories and come back and spend time with the client going over their areas of strength and weakness and, assessing their level of capability, maturity, and so on. So, those organizations typically had what I called an IT governance board. In fact, I mentioned the architectural review board, and whether that's enterprise architecture from a more technical perspective, and as Gartner, we tended to look at the mess that evolved as an enterprise architecture, the spaghetti code, the unplanned. We used to draw the analogy to city planning. So over here you've got Sao Paulo, which had no city planning, and it's a total mess, or Houston for that matter, versus a planned city. Well, the one adhered to its enterprise architecture, and the one probably didn't even have one to adhere to, or if they did, they didn't adhere to it. So that gets very costly and messy and risky for an enterprise over time. But in my graphic on it, I had 3 gears. The third gear, in addition to the architectural review board and let's call it the strategy execution office, you've got that senior management group. Call it the IT governance board, as we did at Gartner, because we were very much engaged with IT, but more generally, perhaps the enterprise governance board, the business governance board. But, you can only get the attention of those senior executives to the decisions necessary for a good portfolio for a certain amount of time, maybe a couple hours a month, to keep the proposals aligned with the strategy. And so it was very important also, to your engagement question earlier, engage with an architectural review board, but also make sure you've got that regular meeting, not an ad hoc meeting, but a regularly scheduled meeting with designated members of that governance board who show up and support the decisions. We'll review the recommendations, and when that strategy execution office does push out some decisions to the business unit saying, sorry, your project proposal didn't cut the mustard, when they then go back to senior management to try and go around the SEO, senior management will say, yeah, we already heard about that, and we're the ones that said no. That's very important to success, that there be that engagement as well.
So when you think about other challenges organizations face in terms of successfully executing on their strategy? What are the main things you think that are holding them back beyond what we've talked about already?
Well, I don't know. The two big bugaboos are really kind of a fuzzy priorities. You know, everything's number one, or not everything, but you got too many number ones. Now, not to be too much of a twit or etymologist, a word person, but let's, priority, prior. That means one, number one. So you have one priority and can't be distracted from that. So that's the other bugaboo is if you've got three or four priorities, then none of them are number one, and it makes it difficult to prioritize among projects that support those programs, those strategic initiatives. So at some point, that governance board, if you want to call them that decision-making body, I think has to come down in favor of one prior strategic initiative. The others, maybe you can have a tie for second or third, that sort of thing. But you can't have those fuzzy priorities. So that's, I think, a big challenge to a lot of organizations because they end up fudging on that in order to make different business leaders happy. And then, of course, there are the distractions. There's always something coming up, and that next shiniest thing. And I understand it when something like AI comes up, and you say, "Oh my gosh, this is so important. We've got to put a bunch of resources on it. It's number one now." Well, what was number one 2 years ago? 2 years ago, we designated our number one priority was what? To break into X market. And that was a 5-year commitment, except that we're going to change that now. It's in year 2. So those kinds of distractions can just really undermine the execution of some key priorities. So yeah, there's a balance to be struck. People want to be flexible. They want to be agile. They want to adapt to changing conditions. But when is that truly merited? And when is that just a distraction? And really take a look back at what was your number one priority until the day before yesterday.
Do you think the C-suite understands the importance of strategy execution as a internal capability in terms of maximizing and accelerating business value? I say that because there's a lot of talk at the moment about bridging the gap between strategy execution. There's stat on stat, talking about how organizations are inherently still bad at that, despite significant process improvement investments over time, and obviously tooling in support of that. And it's kind of puzzled me to a degree over recently that why this isn't a high priority for the C-suite to establish that enterprise function, call it whatever you want, to be able to develop that strategy execution muscle in the organization. Do you see that as a problem? Do you have any thoughts why the C-suite maybe aren't embracing this as a challenge? I think it is, or acknowledging this even.
Well, I think that at the high level, that yes, it is understood that strategy does have to be communicated throughout the organization, that there are mechanisms to do so, that those mechanisms to be effective have to function on a regular basis and receive management support. But there's many a slip twixt the cup and the lip. It's work. It's work that requires, as I say, regularity to perform, and that sometimes will encounter resistance, particularly from organizational units that stand to lose from it. As an example, if you're an IT organization and a mandate comes down that says, and just to come back to our previous discussion, that you're going to match methodology to different projects according to their profile, but you within the IT organization are committed to strictly an agile or scaled agile approach, you're going to give some pushback. That's just an example from sort of my Gartner world. But you can get pushback from a product development organization, a finance organization, manufacturing, or a sales or other organization if their initiatives are seen as low priority. And does the executive level really want to get engaged in those kinds of struggles with those kinds of friction with major business leaders in order to implement a regime of strategy execution? Maybe not, because again, they have limited time. They've got a lot of other stuff on their plate, uh, and this, I think, is where a strategy execution office uh, engaged with that with that governance board um, can come into play. It is a staff function. It performs that work, but it absolutely needs the backup, the support, and the promotion of senior management in order for it to be successful. Um, and I think that may be where we see senior management fall a little bit short, is they set up something, there's a PPM, an EPMO, project portfolio management function, discipline, a few roles. It's understaffed and not fully engaged, perhaps through a governance board. And so it's kind of out there with a little bit of designated power, but not direct power. And that little bit turns out not to be enough. And so perhaps a little bit more active promotion and support. When I say promotion, yeah, publicity and encouragement of the rest of the organization to respect their function. But I think in many cases also just literally give them a promotion so that they have a little bit more status in the organization. So it's not all borrowed power in that sense, but some of it is actual line reporting and peer power, and that I think would help the strategy execution office fulfill what I think most senior management see as necessary but difficult.
Yeah. No, yeah, I definitely believe that that strategy execution office, enterprise function, whatever you want to call it, needs the direct backing of the C-suite because it's a significant transformation, even a multi-year transformation to develop that strategy execution muscle across the organization, and that commitment is key. And you know,
And we see that from those few organizations that we saw at level 4 really executing on this. That was a hallmark of that success.
yeah, and the strategy execution role, we talk about trying to master the art and science of strategy execution. And it was kind of a tagline like I came up with, but then talking to the members, the science is definitely the different frameworks and approaches that we use to solve this problem, but the art relates more to the culture, the human dimension of this, which I think is equally important. One area that I hadn't really put much thought into. So I think it's the balance of that, right? Yeah, personalizing a governance framework that is right for the organization. So rejecting that one size fits all approach that may not work here, right? But also embracing the fact that you're going to have pushback all the way through the organization, because visibility, insight, transparency, whatever, is not always a welcome thing, right?
Well, that's true. And it kind of brings me back to the notion of a career path that involves a promotion. The people that really have the clout, the gravitas, if you will, to make this strategy execution function credible throughout the organization, uh, they those people have years of experience, often delivering successful initiatives and supporting strategy, and they're gonna advance in the organization into the executive ranks eventually. To have that kind of credibility and clout requires talent, experience, and recognition across the organization. Now, if they get promoted up the business ranks, up the technical ranks, up the sales ranks, whatever it is, uh, into a direct report to the C-suite for a given function, then that means they're not supporting the strategy execution function. So one thing that for senior management to consider is perhaps a way station for such people before they get to that direct report level, or before they get to the C-suite itself, or to be a divisional group vice president, maybe before they get there. A stop on the way is in that strategy execution office, uh, where you can leverage that talent, that clout, that experience in order to make sure that your strategy execution is humming away, that it's banging on all cylinders. And then when they've contributed their part to that over a few years, there will be an opportunity for them up the line, and a chance for somebody to step into their shoes.
So
So that's the
maybe,
cultural. You mentioned the cultural
yeah,
thing. So that
yeah,
I think is a big thing, is to make sure that this is a respected and desirable position.
yeah. I mean, because obviously, change management is a big deal, right? In terms of executing and delivering a strategic initiative. When we think about, a strategic internal initiative to improve your overall strategy execution capabilities, addressing the cultural aspects of that is going to be fundamentally important, probably more important than the science of it. Right sizing the framework and governance process. Maybe the last question while I have you. And again, I've been talking about this a little bit in the strategy execution forum, right? How much does the size of an enterprise play into this? When I say that, I mean, you know, there's huge disparity in terms of certain sizes of Fortune 1000s as you get into the Fortune 100, Fortune 50, whatever. Do you think in the larger enterprises there is the reality of being able to have that centralized strategy execution offices that sit on top of these huge business units, which are probably bigger than most other organizations, right? Or is that just going to be reserved to the smaller sort of Fortune 1000 organizations?
Well, I guess I'd talk about four sizes: there's small, medium, large, and extra large. And I'm not sure that in a small to mid-size enterprise, you'll necessarily see a dedicated set of people in a strategy execution office. I
So that
think
could be
probably,
more a PMO that is doing both, operating on both
yeah,
sides of the coin, right?
you'll probably have a few people that are designated part time to PMO, EPMO, SEO types of functions in a smaller enterprise. Uh, Certainly, when you get into the medium to large, and I guess I'm overlapping more than four, but somewhere in there, you're getting hundreds of employees, thousands, getting not just a handful of medium sized to large projects, but many more. And those are allocated to or aligned with a variety of different goals and objectives, strategic and tactical. There, I think you do need a function that's going to help sort this out. Uh, and like anything else, it'll need more people to scale to a larger uh, set of those things: employees, initiatives, strategies, and so on. You start to get into the extra large, uh, and if I understand your question, does it just get too big for a strategy execution office? Yeah, probably it does. You've got some of these global enterprises that have 18 divisions and across 5 different geographies and 17 product lines, or I'm making things up, but you know, there will be, I think, some clear organizational lines and units So it may be that you organize by geography or by division. Say, this division is our largest division, and they need their own strategy execution office. This geography uh, grew by acquisition. It has three now divisions. They're all pretty substantial in size. They need three medium-sized strategy execution office. And maybe one of those for the smaller division is not a full SEO. Maybe it's a PMO that has a strategic dimension to it, uh, and hopefully at a higher level of capability maturity. All of these will engage with, again, an architecture review board and a governance board. So those three gears, uh, if I wanted to say what there's a theme to my talk today, I would say it's those three gears. You've got a strategy execution office. It's engaged with an architecture review board, and that would be both business and enterprise architecture, maybe even application architecture. Although we don't get too mired in technical detail, but also the strategy execution office. So governance board, architecture board, strategy execution.
No, that makes sense. Well, Matt, I want to really thank you for your time today, and I look forward to having you on future episodes of the Strategy Execution Unlocked.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.